Make sure this is working. Okay. So even though there's a bunch of OOP concepts that we see in coding, in real life, an OOP concept might be something like the drive-through or kitchen in a drive-through. So for instance, if you drive up to the window at a drive-through and you ask for like a meal, the people in behind the counter and in the store will do all the work to make that meal together, and all you see is the menu. And then when you drive up, you get the output there. So just because you don't see what's going on doesn't mean that there's nothing there. And essentially, what that means is that in object-oriented programming, you have an object, maybe something like a kitchen, that deals with the data. A data might be something like get order or set order, and the methods will be like make food or make meal or whatever. And then the rest of the program is something that occurs outside of it. So again, once we get into more bigger programs, you're going to be dealing with more things going on. So we want to make sure that we encapsulate items together, just to make sure it works. Now, the concept of this idea here with encapsulation occurs with classes. And we're going to take a look at some code here with the class as well. And we'll take a look at this code, and then I'll go ahead and show us another example that we'll type up together. But essentially, a class uses this keyword called class. We were using the keyword called function before. And it has this nice term called a constructor. Some of us might have heard constructor before. But essentially what this does is it makes the class, and then we have methods that go ahead and deal with that class. Okay? So we can take a look at these constructors by making a very simple example ourselves. So if you'd like, I'm going to go ahead and just create another folder here. Call this guy call them week 5. And I'm just going to go ahead, delete all these, call it Object.js practice, and let me edit this, and then I'll toss it into the Zoom chat for us to take a look at. So this will be my website, and I'm going to go ahead and make a script over here. Nice. So if folks want to go ahead and use this, you can. And let me also open up this guy. Cool. So again, a pretty bare bones class here. But what we're taking a look at now is this concept of object-oriented programming, okay? So one example that we can do here, this is one I usually use. Sometimes the analogies can get a bit weird with how we're approaching it, but I think we're all kind of familiar with dogs or animals and stuff like that as well. Whenever you want to create a class that contains information, but that is an object that you create, you're going to go ahead and define this keyword called class, C-L-A-S-S. And after you define that keyword called class, what you're going to try to do is go ahead and create a name of that class that you want to use, okay? So again, everything in life could be considered this type of object. So in our scenario, let's just say that I wanted to create this class of a dog that I'm going to be dealing with. I'm going to go ahead and type out the keyword of dog there. This could be anything that you want again. Could be gibberish, it could be literally anything. I'm going to use dog though, because what I want to be doing is make these dog objects here, okay? So nice. So after you go ahead and you create this dog object, what you can do now is go ahead and create some attributes that are a part of the class, okay? So we saw before that we had a few variables, or excuse me, we had this keyword called constructor. Go ahead and look at it. Constructor up here. Now in various languages, sure, no worries, Andrew, thanks. In various languages, this part goes on a bit differently, but usually you can go ahead and create the constructor like this, and this constructor goes ahead and it makes an object for us. So essentially, we can all kind of consider all of us to be something like class human, and then a constructor all makes us, but we might have different attributes values down here. So after we go ahead and we create this constructor keyword, what you're going to do is add in these two parentheses. And inside these parentheses are going to be your parameters. So we saw parameters a bit ago with functions, but essentially a constructor like this one here is going to take in values that we can apply to our class. So why don't we just keep this really simple? Why don't I go ahead and create two variables like eye color and fur color? And so whenever I create a dog object, I'm going to need to provide an eye color and a fur color. And essentially, this is why the constructor is created for us. So let's just say that you're making a class called dog, and you want the user to make a bunch of different ones. If you don't have a constructor, each dog object is going to be the exact same, which isn't good for us. We want to make sure that they're all different. So the way that we can make them different is inside this constructor. So the way that we use the difference here is by using this keyword this. And after you go ahead and you type out THIS, this is essentially going to tell us that, you know what, make sure that this object has these attributes. So I have an attribute of eye color. And after I go ahead and I create this eye color guy, I'm going to set it equal to the attribute that I took in from my parameter. So essentially, what this is saying is make a dog object with an eye color that's equal to whatever the user types in. Okay. Now I can also do the same thing here with the fur color, and usually this is probably the easiest way that you're going to see how this is made. The parameters are going to be the same name as the attributes of your class. These guys are called attributes over here, but essentially these could be called whatever you want them to be. This could be this.a, this.b, but you want to make sure that you can reference them later in your script there. Okay. Cool. So not a lot of coding in, but you'll see here that there's a lot of things that we assume, like headers and parameters and calls. We already kind of know how to do those. So let's actually go ahead and inspect this guy in our console. And we'll see here that inside of my console, let me see if I could do something like this. What is it? Not to find it. Oh, that didn't work out for me. Let me go ahead and in my script show us the next step here. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to define my dog class, and down here I'm going to create dog objects. What dog objects are essentially instances of it, and the way that we can create a dog object is with this keyword called new. So new is essentially going to be doing something for us where it goes ahead and it says go ahead and make this new dog object with these two attributes. So I'm just going to type this out, and then we can kind of explore how this is working for us later. Yeah. Oh, hey Selvin, do you have a question?
Oh, finally, everything's working now.
Oh, it's working? Good. Oh, sorry, sorry, did you have a question?
No. I was just like logging in and saying.
Perfect. Sorry, my volume was down. Sorry about that. Cool. Yep, so we're reviewing the chapter 11 right now. And then I'll toss this code in the chat, actually. Let me do that real quick. If you want to go ahead and do it, this one is here. There we go. Nice. So what we're going to be looking at now is how do we make these dog objects. And in our look through of our PowerPoint, you'll see that we have this keyword called new. So a new operator is going to call the class that we just made. It's going to call the constructor of our class, and it's going to pass the arguments that we give it into that object. So that seems really complicated, but it's actually straightforward enough. What it's going to do for us is I'm going to make a variable name, whatever I want to make it, similar to what I said earlier, like my name, like so. What I can call this one now, though, is I'm going to call it like dog1, and I'm going to set it equal to new, and you'll see here that new is highlighted in blue. What new does again is call this constructor up here. So it's going to say, hey, go ahead and grab this constructor. And if I type out dog after it, you'll see here that I get access to this constructor of dog. So now what I could do here is essentially VS Code is really nice with telling you what to type in. You could go ahead and provide the attributes that you want it to be. So I can go ahead and say my dog is brown fur and brown eyes. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in brown for each of these. And what this will do for me is essentially in English, it will say make a new dog object called dog1 and set the object's eye color to brown and fur color to brown. So all that work that is a part of this object is done in this line at 21 where I set these two guys. So what I can actually do here now Let me try to log my dog1 that I just created. And you'll see here that in JavaScript, I get a really neat object here. You'll see I get prototype object, and this contains a bunch of information here. So this is a very bare bones example, but you'll notice, let's just say that you're designing an app that like takes in user information, or it's an app that involves having users a part of your site. You might have a class that's called user, and the user has a full name, username, an ID, an age, a date of birth. All that stuff will be done inside of your constructor when you make a new user object, and objects are essentially the core of all programming that we have. So a lot of object-oriented programming, you'll see when you kind of start doing more of this, you'll look at scenarios kind of through objects as well, is that each object has attributes and they have methods associated with them as well. So for a class of dog, you'll notice here that when I say console.log dog1, I get some information about it, but let's just say that I wanted the user to just see in the screen here information about their dog. Let me go ahead and just type this in, create constructor and attributes up here. So after we go ahead and do our constructor, what can occur underneath our constructor is methods of our class. Now what methods of our class are going to do is essentially what our class will do. So we can define a human class after the dog class, but for a human class, it might be something like eye color, hair color, height, or age. And the methods, a part of it would be something like walk, talk, and speak. Same for a dog. You could do a method of walking or speaking as well. So let's go ahead and try to make one here. Methods are going to be referenced very similar to our functions that we used before. So you'll see here that inside of my method here, we actually don't have, the only difference here is that it's identical to a function heading without the function at the left there. So all you do inside of your method is declare a name, and then you need to provide the two parentheses around it still. So let's kind of experiment with this. So let's go ahead and just say speak. Let's make a method of our class called speak. And you'll notice here that when I type out these two parentheses after it, for my parameter list, I go ahead and that's pretty much my definition. So you'll see up here, I now have in my method dog.speak. So this is essentially methods a part of our object. You could do something human.speak, animal.walk or whatever, but whatever you want this class to do is going to be in our methods. So to try and make this kind of like a holistic example, we could try to reference the attributes of our class. And if I have my speak here, I can kind of do something like a console.log. And what we could try to say here is, let's just, whenever the dog talks, it's going to return information about itself. So let's say that these dogs are like able to talk. So we could say here, I am a dog object with, and I'm going to do this concept that we saw before called concatenation. So you can kind of add strings together like this to make it work. But instead of adding in a predefined string that I want to work with, I'm actually going to reference the attribute that I made earlier called this.eyeColor. And let's just see if this works for me here. So I'm a dog object with this.eyeColor eyes. So let's see if this guy works for me. And if I refresh my code, we'll notice that I'm only running line 29. So you might be wondering, how do I actually call this method? Well, the way that you call it is you reference the object that you made. And in this scenario, the object isn't dog. Dog is the class name. The object I made is called dog1. So that's this. This sometimes can be a bit confusing because you're referencing the same name a few times. But in JavaScript, anything on the left side of the new is what you're going to reference. And when I say dog1 dot, you'll notice that it kind of gives me a bit of information about the different things in it. But I have my eye color, my fur color, and I have this thing down here that says speak. So now if I type out dot speak, let's save this and see what happens. You'll notice nothing happens again because I didn't put in my two parentheses. So after I put in these parentheses here, it's going to say, okay, grab my dog1 and go ahead and call this method up here. And we'll see up here that it says now in console.log, I'm a dog object with brown eyes. Okay. Now, why is this? Why do we really care about this stuff? This is kind of a straightforward example of it. Well, what happens if I make a new dog2 down here, a dog object? And let's just say that I want to go ahead and say, you know what? Let's make it golden gold. So this dog has golden eyes and gold fur. We'll notice here that you might, in previous examples, I would have to go up here and maybe say, you know what, instead of printing out brown, print out gold. But this dog object is shared with this same type of object up here. So if I do dog2.speak underneath this guy, we'll see here that the same method works for both of these, but I can just change the attributes of them, okay? So this is kind of the core of object-oriented programming. You encapsulate that keyword we saw earlier called encapsulation. I'm encapsulating a lot of things that need to occur inside of a single object. And now this object can be packaged and moved around into other areas wherever I want it to be.
Yeah. If for example, if I want all my dogs with a brown fur, for example, I can make a constant of a fur brown and make the variables for the color of the eyes.
Great work. So there's a few ways you could actually approach it for this one, but let's kind of go with that constant idea. Let's just say that in my constructor that's called with fur color, you could say let fur color equal to brown up here. Oh, let's see here. You know what, JavaScript might not. Let's see it this way here. So you're gonna make me do it this way. So one way, there's a few ways that you can approach doing it. You might be tempted to name it out here, but what you could do instead is kind of just default it inside of your constructor. So right here, this dot fur color, if you want all your dogs to have brown fur, what you could say is instead of setting it equal to what the user types in, you can just force it to be brown inside of here. So now when I call this dot fur color down here, and let's actually finish my speaking thing. Eyes and plus do it like this way. So what I did up here now is I set my fur color to always be brown. And now what I did down here is I'm saying I'm a dog object with this dot eye color eyes, this dot fur color fur. Now we'll see up here that I have brown both times for each of these guys. And it overrides whatever I typed in here because this guy up here is forcing it to be. So if I change this one to red, you'll see now that each of them are red fur.
And okay, you make the variable for the fur color to be red. So, but on the class dog, on the attributes of the class dog,
yeah,
the dog one, for example, you put brown. If for one of those dogs you want to make one of them to have a specific color, even this dot fur color is red, you can make it also, right?
Yep. So another thing that we could do here is kind of modify these after we make them. And one way that you can do that is up here. Let's do dog1.speak. You can access the fur color variable of my object, dog1.furcolor. And I can actually set it equal to something new. So let me actually set this one back to brown here. And you'll notice here, I didn't do that one yet. Let me do dog1.speak again. So I updated my variable of fur color to brown. I have my line at 21 run. And you'll see here, I guess I kind of ran it twice there. But it's going to go ahead and change my color from red to brown. Okay. So one thing to note, though, is that if I'm taking in a parameter and I'm not using it, that's not really good coding practice. So what we can actually do here, this is a bit, you don't need to do this necessarily, but for your example is if I want to default what the user's typing in, you can actually make some default constructors or multiple constructors. And what that means is that if I create another constructor that only takes an eye color, what I can do here in this scenario is set this dot eye color equal to eye color like normal. But then I can go ahead and make my fur color, let's just make it brown, default to brown. And what I'm doing here is essentially if the user only provides me an eye color parameter, then I'm going to force the fur color to be brown in this scenario. So how do you actually code that into our item down here? Well, let's just double check if these guys are back to normal. Let me actually delete that console.log. Oh, mind. I should scratch that really quick. I believe we can make the default. Sorry, that was from Python. Let me show you real quick. There should be a way we can default when the user doesn't type it in. Let me check one. Let me just try out one thing really quick. I think if we set this equal to brown right here, so let me do one thing. Okay, so no errors just yet. Let me make one more dog. So dog tree is equal to new dog, and I'm just going to provide it an eye color. Let's say blue. Dog tree.speak. Okay, yeah, so this is how you can default items. So unfortunately, you can't have multiple constructors, but what's happening here is in Java's terms, if you go ahead and you say equals brown, like this one here, or equals 5, whatever you want it to be, if the user doesn't provide a parameter there, and you'll see down here that I only provided one parameter for blue, what it will say is the user didn't put anything in, I'm going to default this to be brown. So once that's defaulted to brown, you'll see down here that when I speak, it's actually setting it to brown again. And let's just make this really obvious. Let's just say like yellow for color. And you'll see here that even if I don't provide it a parameter, it still ran and set it to yellow there. So that's actually the way that you can default things to be values if you want the user to maybe provide it or not. And for instance, that's a lot of scenarios like if you're making an account and you don't provide a username, it might make a default username for you. This is kind of how you would do it there. And again, whatever attributes you want of your class, you're going to make them in the constructor here. So essentially, if you want age as well, this.age, you can force every dog's age with this line right here to be 5. And now the age is an attribute of my class that I can reference anywhere in my code, in my methods, or down here as well. See, now dog1.age is a thing that's occurring, and all these dogs will be 5.
Even without putting inside a constructor?
It's occurring right here. So it technically is in the constructor. It's just not in the parameter list.
Okay.
So anything that you want as an attribute must be defined up here in the eye color there. Now, another thing that you can do here.
Because the parameter is something that can change for object to object, but these age outside of parameters just make like a constant basically.
Exactly. That's a really good point. So these guys are up to the user on how they could change. We have no idea what it's going to be, but we know that these are pretty significant there. Now, what you could also do here, we saw that the let variable wasn't that good with it. Let me actually try to show you one more thing you can do here. So we had this.age is equal to 5. If we say age is equal to 5 here, and let me make a new method called like getAge. Do dog1.getAge. You'll notice here, age isn't defined. So even though I'm defining it as age is equal to 5 right underneath my class, I still have to use this.age to make sure I'm referencing that guy up there. And you'll see up here that if you want to define items outside of here, you're actually going to have a bit of trouble. Let me say, let's see if I can do var age. Yeah, so in JavaScript, in other languages you can kind of do this, but essentially in JavaScript, if you want anything to be defined a part of your class, you'll need to define it inside of here as this.age is equal to 5. So if I go ahead this way, experiment one more thing here. Yeah.
I think it's because of the lowercase
The
on the
in age.
get age.
Oh,
No,
get
no,
age.
on the get age it's uppercase.
Oh yeah, so this the method names can be anything I want them to be. That can just kind of actually be like, foobar as well for it. So that one doesn't necessarily matter. Unfortunately, though, it looks like if you want something to be constant, you're going to kind of have to hard code it inside of here. Now let me see something like this. Okay, so we might be able to make constants. Make this guy var really quick. So I'm just kind of experimenting really quick with how you can fiddle around with these objects here. Okay. Let me do this way. Yeah, so JavaScript, most likely because of how its objects are working, aren't... In other languages, you can kind of make a variable shared between them, but in JavaScript, you'll have to do a bit more tweaking for it. But essentially, each of these constructor guys, they're going to have... Each dog, whenever it's made, is going to have these 3 attributes, and they're going to be set to these specific conditions here. Okay. And again, similar, so you can hard code it this way, but good practice is to essentially use the default options where you go ahead and you say age is equal to 5 up there. And now if the user provides an age that they want to use, then your code can account for it and put it in. Otherwise, it's going to default to 5 up there. So that's kind of what the defaults are. Okay. We can see up here now, if I actually do get age like this one. Nice. So you'll see I'm getting 5 for each of these ones. Unfortunately, though, with how this is made up, you'll see here that our JavaScript isn't smart enough to really know how to default items. So if I put 5 inside of here, let's just say I'm coding and I'm like, you know what? I know that I have my eye color as brown and my age, I want it to be 5. So I'm going to put a 5 in right here. You'll see here what happens is it says, I'm a dog object with brown eyes and 5 fur, which isn't what I wanted. So JavaScript doesn't know that you want this to be age attribute. It goes by what the list of the parameters is. So anything that is in the second parameter will be the fur color. Anything that's in the first parameter slot is always going to be the eye color. So to fix this, what you would have to do is essentially provide another parameter inside of there and then set this guy to 5 or change how this guy's laid out up here. Now see here, this one's 5. If I change this one, let me make this one 12. Nice. So now my age attribute gets updated up to 12. Okay. And you'll see up here that usually the purpose of object-oriented program encapsulation is that the user, or what we're doing, is only looking at this. And we already do stuff like this. You remember our console.log? Well, console is an object, and .log is a method associated with that object. So this OOP and what we're doing is how every language is built pretty much. All your methods like printing, function calls, adding, all goes back to OOP concepts there, okay? Cool. So let me put this updated version of our code inside of the Zoom chat there. What I'm going to do really quick is show us a bit of code. Let's see here. About where this is pretty useful. And so let me make this real quick for us, and then I'll share it with us instead of typing it all up by hand. Do it this way. And let me also make, you know what, I'll just do it this way. Cool. All right, so this was from the book here. Try to make sure it is all organized okay. Script. I want to make sure I didn't lose anything. Oh, all right. Cool. So you'll notice here that in my script up here for this object, I go ahead and I create a class called point, and my constructor takes in two values called x and y. And you'll see here that my this.x is set to x, this to y is equal to y, and I can actually access this variable called count. That's went ahead and is made there as well. Just make sure that this guy is down here. So you'll see up here that my count variable down here, return point.count, if it's undefined, it will be at 0. Otherwise, it's going to be defined here. I'll go ahead and take a look at more of this code right here later. That's called a ternary if. But essentially, we have this pretty neat website now. If I go ahead and run this guy, you'll see here it says, click your mouse anywhere on this web page to capture its location. After capturing 2 clicks, click the distance apart button to display their separation in pixels. Click again for additional points. So you can see here that if I click, oh, this guy running for me. My script might not be running right away here. Where is this one? My JS file not working. Okay, so it's kind of broke right now, but essentially what would happen is once you click them, it should update your file. And the purpose of this one, I'll go ahead and fix it up and release it later, but the purpose of this guy is to make sure that we could see where the class is being created each time we're running it. Okay, cool. You might have noticed this keyword as well called static. Static essentially means that it's shared between an object. So essentially 2 point objects, if they're static, that means that they share that value. So essentially if you wanted to have a variable in your class called like amount of people, that might be static because what that does is it shows you how many current people are made or whatever you're doing with your class. Okay. Cool. So I'll upload that in a bit here, and let me double check what else this guy's looking for. Okay, so it's static. Nice. So the next big thing that I want to look at here is our event handlers. And event handlers, again, are things that occur when an event is done on your code. And essentially you'll see up here that in my HTML language, in my HTML code, whenever I click on something, I run this method called capture click event. And you could see here that we have this argument inside of that called event essentially. And so what this does for us is that when the user interacts with a web page, the JavaScript engine generates an event object. Again, an object is what we've been looking at. And it contains information about what the user just did. If the user clicks on a web page, the engine generates a click event with information about the location of the click. And what we do here is we capture that event by using the keyword event in the onClick event handlers code. So let me go ahead and show us how we can do this kind of anywhere in our code. So let me go ahead and just double check our JS practice. Let me call this one JS event practice. Cool. And we'll see up here that if I go ahead and inside my script up here, I'm going to get rid of the class that we were just kind of working with. I'm just going to do this event practice. what I'll do up here is I'm going to make a function called func. I'm going to call it function, function capture click. And what I'm going to do here, I'll leave all this styling the same. I'm going to add an onClick function to my H1 code. What I'll do is I'm going to call onClick the capture click function, and I'm going to provide it this event. Now you'll notice that I have a parameter list here called, inside of my parameter list of capture click, there's an event provided for me. And up here, you'll notice that I don't have a parameter ready to take it in. So what happens in my back end code here if this happens? I'll do this one. Oops. Let me do it this way. You'll notice that I'm not really running anything on my on click here. It looks like I'm not getting an error either. But what I would like to do here is essentially log the event that I'm getting from down here. And the way I could do that is by doing something like this. So I'm going to take in the event from down here, put it into my header function, my parameter, event of any, and then let me just try to log it here. Oops. There we go. So you'll see here, when I double click on my header, I get this mouse event that happens. And there's a bunch of information about this object. So you'll see here that mouse event is an object inside of my code, inside of Java. And I have a bunch of information like the path of where it is, the return value, the source element, the target, bubbles, buttons. So if you're ever working with a website and like let's just say that you hover over something, it might do something for me as well. So what we could try to do here as well is on click. Oh, this one says on DB1 click. Let me change this one back to on click normally. There we go. So you'll see down here that I had it on DB1 click. So what that means is on double mouse button one click. That's not something that we need to worry about. I have these ones here. But I can also do different events here. I could do something like let's see here. On focus. So on focus is something where I go ahead and look at the code there. What I'm going to do here, I'll make another function called capture focus. And let me just write a message instead of the event that's given to us. Call it focusing like so. And whenever the user is on clicking this button, or excuse me, hovers over it, let me try to run the capture focus, and I'm going to provide the event handler that occurs with that. So let me go ahead and try to run this guy. And it looks like my pointer event is still running. Focus might not run for me here. Let's just try and see. Let me see what the other ones are instead of that one. Let's try mouse over. So on mouse over, I'm going to capture. Cool. And you'll notice here that when I mouse over my header 1, I actually get this event ran. And when I double click on it, the other event runs. But in this scenario, when I hover over it, it does that. So essentially what you could do in your JavaScript is if you have on mouse over on your elements, if you mouse over something, you might be able to make it bigger. And then if it's gone, I'll make it smaller again. So that's essentially something where we did that with buttons, but we can also do it with events in JavaScript. And it's pretty neat how powerful you can make them as well. But that's essentially what event handlers are. And events, there's a bunch of events that can occur on a website, such as on click, on hover, on removal or whatever. And this is the ways that we can kind of capture them. Okay. You'll see up here that capture click E. I was calling it event. You can also call it E. It doesn't really matter. E or event is usually what's used. But all these guys are objects. So essentially E, you can access where the client X is or the client Y is. Or you can go ahead and determine stuff about that one. And then you can see down here in his code that we make, we get the element by the ID, and then we change the inner HTML to be a value that's a part of that object. So point1.value is a part of this new point class again, but essentially this is how you can kind of combine object-oriented programming with those items there. Okay. So we were looking at arrays quite a bit. As a general idea again, when we have an array here, we can create a new object, a new array like so, new array of Ellie, Caden, Alexa, and Olivia. And you can see here that an array is also an object with its own methods and methods and items associated with it. And you can see up here that we could do multiple things with the array as well. A cool thing that you can do, and I'll show us how we can do this as well. I'm going to open back up my JS code. Cool. So you'll see down here that I made these different dog objects. What I could say here, I can create a new array. And I can actually go ahead and store the objects that I just made into this array. Now, why is this important for me? Well, what I can do here is loop over them pretty straightforwardly. So I could say for dogs, ooh, like so. You know, let me just do the normal way that we did it. I forgot the for in one. So we could say for int of I is equal to 0. I is less than all dogs dot length. Why is this guy not? Let me get rid of this guy real quick. Huh. One sec, everyone. It should be. Right. Let me try this one here. For some reason it's not making it into an array for me here. We just call it A. Okay. But essentially what we could do here is inside of our array, once we make it, is access each of these attributes of our class there. Okay. So we could say over here that there's a few methods with the array as well that I kind of wanted to show us as well. Let me go ahead. Let me just do this with strings for the time being. So let me grab their example really quick. Call it stunt group. Fortunately, I should be able to do it inside of my object there. Let me see. This one does it. Okay, so we can ignore this for the time being. But I made a stunt group array. And what we're used to essentially is for stunt group.length. I could do my I++. I could go ahead and try to log into my console. The ith index of each of these stunt groups. So if I go ahead and reload this guy, you open up this guy one more time. Cool. We'll see here that I'm getting Ellie, Caden, Alexa, and Olivia pretty well. The cool thing about our arrays, I believe we could do something like stunt group.reverse. And if I do something like this, what it will do is reverse the people inside of my array there. So Ellie's at the end now. Olivia and Alexa are there. And as we're familiar with, I'm getting each of these indexes, so 0, 1, 2, and 3. But there's a bunch of different ways that you can loop through these arrays as well. Now there's a bunch of methods a part of arrays as well. So I reverse this array up here. I'm going to actually sort the version for this one. And you'll see up here that I get it reversed, but then I go from A, C, E, and O. So it sorts it alphabetically. You can override how you sort them. But in general, the alphabetical sorting is the way to go. How do you sort them alphabetically and then put them in reverse? Well, what you could do is call stunt group.sort first, and then reverse it that way too. Now it looks like my VS Code is being weird, so what I want to do for us one more time is to show the power of arrays. So if I make an array called all dogs, and I go ahead and I just plop into my array over here each of the dog objects I made, I could say for I is 0, I is less than all dogs.length, I plus plus. What I can do here, let me log each dog that I find. So I'll do console.log something like this. And you'll see here that now I have an array of each of my dog objects, and I'm actually able to access each of them pretty easily. Why is this important for us? Well, what I can do here after I call I is call the methods that are a part of each of them. So now essentially, if I wanted to say make all my dogs speak, I could say log all dogs of I.speak. If I refresh this guy, you'll see here that I get all these nice ones where it actually does the speaking for me there, which is really neat. And essentially, that's how powerful arrays are. The purpose of them is to kind of keep everything in order for us so that we can go through them a bit more effectively as we're going through it. Okay, so that's kind of that's combining the concept of our arrays with our objects that we're making. And you'll notice here arrays can be kind of useful in scenarios where you're typing out stuff like this. If you get an array that has the author, book title, and meeting date, let's just say that this array was called A. What I could say here is A of 0 is equal to author. A of 1 is equal to book title. And then A of 2 is equal to date. So there's stuff like this that you can use as well. And it's all pretty helpful for determining how you can like create a pretty functioning website there. Cool. And you'll see here again that arrays can be used for all of these guys. It doesn't matter how you're really storing them. It's just a useful storage object. And there's plenty of ways that you can iterate through them. We saw in last week's JavaScript, we saw the different ways of looping. You can use a while loop, you can use a for loop, or you can use a for each loop as well. Okay. So cool. So this is kind of the concept of object-oriented programming. By and large, the chapter 11 has a lot of examples of how to put them into code. So I would say you can copy the code from there, from the PowerPoints, and put them in there that way too. This guide's recorded for us. The main thing that I think is important for the next chapters is taking a look at those on-click events. So the point tracker one, the JS event practice is good because if you look at your console log really quick, you'll see up here that when I hover over this guy, I get focusing, but when I click on him, I get a new event. So if you wanted to put events into your website, this is one way that you can do it. And the way that we're doing this is combining JavaScript with events and objects. Okay.